I didn't tell anyone here not to support BDS. It's not my job to tell anyone what to do or what to think. What the argument I'm making is that I don't think it's effective in ending the occupation, and I agree with you entirely that a unified Palestinian strategy is hugely important, and you are much better placed than me to suggest whether BDS is having that impact on Palestinian society. But I'm coming from the perspective of what I think is going to end the occupation. I don't think BDS is going to end it, and I'm not passing judgment on those who support it. I don't think the BDS movement is racist. I think there are elements in it that are questionable, and I think that there are parts of its aims which are highly questionable in terms of whether you think Israel has a right to exist or not.
I mean, one of the points is that this movement originates very much from a call that came from Palestinian civil society to boycott Israeli academic institutions, but also more broadly cultural and academic boycott. And that's obviously crucially important in terms of what has led to the forging of various kinds of transnational links. So and it's the case that, for example, in terms of my motivation, when the idea of being in solidarity with Palestinian colleagues and students whose universities have been under siege, constantly degraded, people can't get even to their classes because they can't get through checkpoints. I mean, that's crucially important. And it's not, I mean, it's do you cross the picket line that the Palestinian BDS movement's tried to assemble? And it's not just about this question of precisely, I mean, the discussion has been very centered on the impact on Israel, but there's also an impact on a Palestinian movement. So, that's obviously absolutely crucial. And that's my, yeah.
This is going to be the last kind of comments from our panelists because we do have to vacate the room. So I'm going to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak, and then we're going to run.
Yeah, let me start with the Palestinian representation and so on. I think we already discovered this evening, at least. This is not, the BDS is not the Palestinian leadership. It doesn't claim to be the Palestinian leadership, and the Palestinian issue of representation is definitely an issue that has to be solved. The BDS is not going to solve that. The BDS is an attempt to convince non-Palestinians to support the Palestine cause. Having even 6 Palestinians on this table would not have done the job if your job is to convince non-Palestinians. So actually it's quite good that there are no Palestinians on the panel, because it's not about what is the right strategy for the Palestinian national movement. The question is the international community willing to support pressure on Israel as a legitimate means to change the reality on the ground? Now, if we will succeed in doing that, and the mainstream media, and the mainstream academia, and the mainstream political system in this country and other countries would support this strategy, the BDS would be a success. Not only if the goals on the ground would be achieved, which could not be achieved without the Palestinian national movement strategizing and finding the right way to do it. The second point is we were asked about more, I think you called it BDS 201 or 202. I think it's 0.5 BDS, what you suggested. The whole, as I tried to explain, the idea of the BDS, or pressure from the outside, as a strategy, as a paradigm, stemmed from the failure of the peace process. The peace process was based on the idea of the two-state solution, of shrinking Palestine to 20% of what it was, and shrinking the Palestinian people to 50% of who they are. The BDS is part of a conversation that says all the Palestinians are victims of the policies of Israel. Who exactly can we target against the ethnic cleansing of the Bedouins in the Nakab? The constructor who builds in Hebron? Who exactly can we target against the Israeli law that does not allow Palestinians from both sides of the Green Line to live together as a family? A constructor from Halil? We have to understand that the level of criminality pursued against the Palestinians inside Israel, against the Palestinians in the occupied territories, and against the Palestinians in the refugee camps is the same level of criminality and the same source for this criminality. And this is the conversation we are engaging in. We are not substituting anyone's representation. We are not taking over any issue. We are just trying to have a conversation with you, and through you eventually and hopefully with the people inside so that the transformation for the benefit of everyone would be there. The BDS is a successful campaign. It may be too early, indeed, to judge it, but on the other hand, it has to be evaluated and re-evaluated to make it more effective, more successful, more in coordination with anyone who is part of the general human effort to bring justice and peace to Palestine and Israel. Thank you.
I agree with you. I think there should have been a Palestinian on the panel. I actually think the internationalisation of the solution is an interesting idea. I think that what's happened or didn't happen in September around the United Nations was a clarion call for Israel. I think it's a prime example of a strategy that outsmarted Israel actually, and I think Israel found itself in a really difficult corner to turn and say we reject a call in a multilateral institution because it's unilateral. And I think that it was very smart. I think it made Israel think in a way which the BDS movement doesn't make Israel think. And the reason I think that I don't think that what the comment that was made about I think what you're saying is a targeted settlement boycott. I don't think that is absolutely the same as the peace process. I think we'd be having a very different conversation in this room if the BDS movement was about a targeted boycott. I'm not saying that I necessarily would support it, but I think that the entire debate would be different, because I think that the position we would be in is a position which does not put people on the defensive, because it recognises the legitimate right of the other side to exist. And I think the fact that the level of criminality that exists inside the Green Line, over the Green Line, is not distinguished, as the comment has just been made, is exactly the reason the BDS movement does not succeed and will not succeed in ending the occupation, because it does not acknowledge in any way, shape or form that there are two parties in the conflict. And I agree that one party has a much bigger level of responsibility and is in a much better position to change the stalemate and to change the status quo. But there is agency on both sides, and I think that this conversation doesn't recognise that.
We have about a minute left for both.
Very quickly, specific settlement boycott. I think it would be extremely ineffective because the settlement economy is most of it is very integrated into the main Israeli economy. Most of the settlers commute to work. The whole settlement project was about building a network of satellite communities within the occupied territories to allow Israel to feel like they're living on the Israeli side. And also, I think it's morally flawed in a sense to boycott, say, a small grocery producer who is producing on illegally occupied Palestinian land, but to let corporations run by veterans of the IDF and the Shin Bet alone. Is it too early to judge? Yes, but I don't think it means we shouldn't be asking the question and checking ourselves what progress have we made. And I do think that the BDS, I stand by my points that the BDS is failing on several important fronts, especially engagement with dissenters within Israel, and sometimes is making life worse and harder for them. I think the greatest thing to be said for the BDS is that it is indeed bringing the Palestinian refugee community worldwide back into the debate. One of the greatest faults and historical errors and disasters of the Oslo process was that it cut off the refugees. The BDS campaigns gives Palestinian abroad a voice and a role in the movement, and that's great. I just think that the whole thing can be better and more targeted, and no doubt we'll see in the future.
Dr. Lee, quickly, and then...
Okay, just to address the point about targeted sanctions, it's very alluring to think that a regime you don't like simply rests on the actions of a few social groups, a handful of individuals here, some bad guys there, a few generals there, some nasty elites who are making all the policies. But actually, as Ilan Pappe has just alluded to, systems of oppression actually rely on much broader social networks that you can't get at by just targeting a handful of individuals. Now, of course, the people who most profit from the occupation and so on should ideally bear the highest burden. But what you tend to find with targeted sanctions in particular, those are the ones that the cost of those can actually be displaced onto other people and borne by society more generally. So actually we need to think quite carefully in quite a sophisticated way about how is it that a regime can last. How is it that a regime that treats people in such appalling ways anywhere in the world, be it Burma or be it Iraq or be it Syria and so on, it has a tremendous amount of social support. And we have to think about ways that that can be changed, shifted, and new opportunities for counter-hegemonic struggle and the real liberation of Palestinian people can be opened up. And that, I think, is how we should be measuring success. It may be too early to measure success, but I'm talking about how do you measure it, what is the method for doing it. And that would be my criteria anyway. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. I do have a lot of thank yous to the people that help support us, but I think just we have to get out. So